Have relics been important in the Shinto tradition?
Sacred objects play a very important role in Shinto ritual. Every shrine houses some small token of the deity who graciously calls this humble place home for the benefit of worshippers who come to pay their respects. These objects, called Goshintai or revered kami body, are said to include such unremarkable items as a mirror, sword, comb, ball of iron, paintings, pebbles, or pieces of carefully cut paper. Worshippers generally do not get even a passing glimpse of the objects, for they remain always behind the innermost shrine's closed doors. People visit a shrine not so much because the sacred objects are there, as because the presence of the kami makes the place holy. When Christians or Buddhists, for example, make pilgrimage to a special church or stupa, they frequently do so because certain objects associated with a particular sacred person are enshrined there. They may not believe that the objects themselves contain miraculous powers, but it is the presence of the objects that makes the place worth visiting. Shinto's sacred objects play a very different role. Many worshippers may not even be aware of exactly what items a given shrine holds. In other words, the symbols of the kami are of secondary importance from the perspective of Shinto worshippers.
What is ancestor veneration and what is its connection with Daoism or CCT?
Concern over maintaining the integrity of one's connections with family. Lineage is one of the hallmarks of Chinese religious and social life. Members of each family line male descendants from a shared ancestor, with wives attached to their husband's line, acknowledge both the continued spiritual presence and the sacredness of their forebears. Their reasons are many: expression of grief, assistance of the deceased in his or her struggles beyond the grave, the desire for blessings, feeling a sense of family cohesiveness, showing continued affection for the dead. Long after the funeral and an extended period of official mourning, families pay homage to the dead both at the cemetery and at the ancestral shrine in the home. There, on the altar table, the family preserves a set of tablets, each with the name of one deceased relative inscribed on it. In very wealthy families of times past, the oldest son would dedicate his life to looking after the proper performance of the rites, foregoing virtually all other activities. For most families today, ongoing activities include chiefly the regular visits to the cemetery, annual refurbishment of the grave for the feast called Clear and Bright, Qingming, and daily prayers at the home shrine. At home, family members make the same kinds of symbolic offerings to the ancestors as to the deities enshrined on the domestic altar. Very wealthy families have often built special ancestral temples as major monuments to the spiritual power of the dead. Few, if any, of these practices or specific concerns are uniquely deist. It is all part of the broadly Chinese religious patrimony, with some elements perhaps more closely linked to CCT than to any specific major tradition.
Is exorcism important in Daoist practice?
Many Daoist rituals are designed to expel, control, or pacify troublesome spirits, or, by extension, to banish drought, famine, or outlaws who might have been plaguing the local citizenry. Daoists rarely identify individual problems as personal cases of demonic, gui, possession. Much more common are instances in which a specialist's skills are required to liberate temples, homes, and business establishments from evil influences. Until some 30 years ago, Roman Catholic tradition included a specific ritual to ordain young candidates for the priesthood to the order of exorcist, one of 4 so-called minor orders. Ordination to the Daoist priesthood still includes an emphasis on the ability to perform exorcism as one of its essential features. Rare descriptions of demonic possession suggest some elements similar those described in Roman Catholic archival accounts of exorcism, including the need to have several stout attendants restrain the possessed person occasionally. After performing a variety of ritual actions, such as lighting candles and incense and burning the appropriate charm, the exorcist enjoins the spirit to depart and a contest of wills ensures. More common, indeed regularly scheduled, rites of temple purification may include dramatization of an encounter between the offending demon and the deity called Chankei, dispatcher of demons. After the demon, sometimes played by a member of the temple staff or a professional actor, steals an incense burner, the priest/deity subdues the evil one and returns the stolen item to the temple gods. Only through the dominance of Yang over Yin can a successful exorcism be carried out. A high moment occurs as the high priest drives the evil spirit out, to the accompaniment of intense sound from percussion instruments. Another method for ridding a building of an evil presence is to create billows of holy smoke by boiling oil and adding water to it.
What is the Daoism?
Daoist stories of how the world came to be are full of mythic features similar to those of other cosmogonies. They tell how order overcame chaos, how the heavens and earth came to be separated, and how the innumerable deities 36,000 according to one reckoning fit into the grand picture. What is unique and most interesting about Daoist myth is that the gods do not necessarily take an active role in cosmic affairs. They do not intervene in the unfolding cosmos, nor even nudge the process along, for that matter. Instead, they allow the fundamental laws of creation itself to operate unimpeded. Indeed, the gods themselves come into being as part of this whole unfolding set in motion by an impersonal power called heaven.
What should I expect to see upon entering a synagogue?
Synagogues of the various different Jewish communities use their interior spaces in different ways. But the one thing you will invariably see is the ark. Almost as soon as you enter, your eye will be drawn to the back wall. There, a pair of small doors, or perhaps a beautifully embroidered or brocade cloth, mark the place in which the Torah scrolls are kept. This is the post-temple version of the Ark of the Covenant. Should you visit during worship ceremonies, you will also see the Torah scroll itself. Often cloaked in a beautiful cloth, sometimes tooled silver. Some Torah scrolls are topped with a crown, keter, as a reminder of the kingly, royal status of the divine source. Inside the cloth, a binder, mappa, might further protect the scrolls from damage. Many Ashkenazic synagogues in Central and Eastern Europe also adorn the scroll with a Torah shield, TAS. Wealthier synagogues often possess many sets of Torah scrolls, used in rotation for different occasions. In order to keep track of the point in the text at which a given scroll was open, the elaborately tooled silver Torah shield might have interchangeable plates with the word Sabbath or the name of a particular holy day. Many synagogues will have a bimah, high place, also called al-mimar, a platform on which there is a desk to hold the Torah scrolls for reading. Traditional communities place the bimah, which symbolically replaces the temple altar, in the center of the space facing the ark. Reform synagogues move it nearer the ark, elevated on a stage and facing the congregation. A sanctuary lamp is also symbolic of the sacred presence and is usually located near the ark. One feature that often distinguishes Orthodox synagogues is the provision of separate sections for men and women, with men typically in front and women behind or to the side, either on the main floor or in a gallery above. Like many contemporary mosques, some synagogues separate genders with a partition running front to back down the center of the main floor.
Were there any mothers of the church?
There were many important church mothers, women of great influence in the early church. They have been less famous because they rarely wrote and published as did their male counterparts. Unfortunately, we know little of many of these women apart from often scanty or anonymous references in the writings of the Fathers and in early histories of Christianity. The historian Eusebius, for example, mentions some 55 women as making important contributions. Recent research has begun to give some of these outstanding women names and faces. Some of the first well-known women were martyrs such as Blandina, d. 177, and Perpetua and Felicitas, who died in 203, along with the so-called Desert Fathers. Credited with the beginnings of monasticism were a number of desert mothers. Macrina, c. 327 to 379, sister of Basil and Gregory of Nyssa, was also a prominent churchwoman. We know from the testimony of other authors that she was a respected theologian.
What kind of calendar do deists and practitioners of CCT observe?
Firmly anchored in traditional astrological calculations, the Chinese lunar calendar consists of 12 months of 29 or 30 days, since the time between new moons is about 29 and a half days. The lunar year dovetails with the solar with the intercalation of extra months at certain intervals. Reckoning began around 2637 BCE, so that the year 2000 marks the year 4637. Each of the 12 animals of the zodiac is associated with a particular quality or event and gives its name to every 12th year. Beginning with the rat, industry and prosperity, and proceeding in order through ox, spring planting, tiger, valor, hare, longevity, dragon, power and good fortune, snake, cunning, horse, perseverance, sheep. Filial piety, or goat, monkey, health, rooster, protection, dog, fidelity, and pig, home and family. The year 2000 is the year of the dragon, 2001 that of the snake, 2002 that of the horse, and so on. 5 full cycles, each named after one of the 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal and water, equals 60 years, an important interval for ritual purposes. Major annual markers are the winter, maximum yin, and summer, maximum yang, solstices and vernal and autumnal equinoxes. During each month, the most important times are the moments of new and full moon. Each month is divided into 10-day periods, 6 of those in turn considered a special time period, and 6 of those in turn equaling a full year. In addition, each year is divided into 24 climatic periods called breaths or nodes, described by such phrases as full of snow or clear and bright. Every year, month, day, and hour is further identified by a combination of 10 heavenly stems and 12 earthly branches, the monthly or zodiacal symbols. Branches and stems are primarily numerical designators, but each also bears important symbolic connotations. If you match one stem with one branch for succeeding years, S1/B1, S2/B2, S1/B11, S2/B12, S3/B1, and so on, you end up back at the beginning after 60 years. The result is an extremely detailed system of pinpointing special times according to a host of definitive characteristics. Each event occurring on Earth has its heavenly parallel. For every conceivable type of human behavior there is an auspicious moment. Thus, the calendar has been not merely a way of keeping track of times for religious observances, but a kind of temporal map for negotiating the cosmos as well.
How did Islam become important in Southern Asia?
Further east than Iraq and Iran, the Mughal dynasty, 1502 to 1757, established Islamic rule over much of South Asia. From Afghanistan across at least the northern two-thirds of India. Great monarchs such as Akbar, Jahangir, and Shah Jahan turned cities like Delhi and Agra into architectural showpieces with works like the Taj Mahal. After about the mid-18th century, European colonialism began to make inroads into lands formerly under Islamic regimes. Not until the mid-20th century did major colonial powers begin to withdraw, ceding political control back to indigenous populations. One dramatic example of that relatively recent change is the independence of India from Britain and the partition of India that created the Muslim state of Pakistan. 1948, itself divided in 1971 into Pakistan and Bangladesh.
Is there any difference between meditation and contemplation?
Meditation and contemplation are important practices in many religious traditions. The two terms are often used synonymously to refer to a prayerful focus on inner spiritual realities. There are, however, some important differences in the methods used for that focusing. It is helpful to keep in mind that there are variations in both theory and practice among the major religious traditions. In general, meditation involves a non-discursive concentration on some object, either verbal or visual. The idea is not to engage in thinking about the object of focus, but merely to allow it to function as a kind of controlled distraction. By targeting the focal object exclusively, the meditator frees up the mind and spirit to achieve a deeper level of simple awareness. Many traditions follow the practice of having a preceptor or spiritual guide assign a specific symbol to each meditator. That symbol can be a word or a phrase, sometimes called a mantra, repeated slowly and deliberately. It can also be an object upon which the meditator concentrates visually, such as a candle flame or a flower. When a meditator becomes aware that the mind is wandering, the solution is to observe "my mind is wandering" or something similar, and return to concentration. Gradually the number and intensity of distractions dwindle. Some traditions allow that there is important intellectual content in meditation, such as a point of doctrine on which the meditator reflects for deeper insight. Contemplation involves a different method. Here the immediate goal is to enter imaginatively into a spiritual reality, and ultimately to be united with that reality. As its Latin root words suggest, the contemplator seeks to become one with or abide in a sacred place, come, with, and templum, temple. Some traditions hold that contemplation is a state of pure intuition beyond any mental content. Others include in their understanding of contemplation the active imaginative entry into an important scene, as if the contemplator were there with the players in some sacred action. whatever the precise definition or method used in a particular tradition. It is fair to suggest that meditation precedes and prepares for contemplation.
Has martyrdom ever been important in Shinto history?
Shinto tradition reveres many religious heroes who died defending their emperor and homeland. They are martyrs in the broadest sense of the term. They died not for a religious creed narrowly defined, but out of allegiance to the larger complex of beliefs that has been integral to Japanese history and culture. People like the cultural icon Sugawara Michizane, who is said to have perished as a result of his convictions, take their place alongside the royal heroes, the princes who died in defense of the imperial house. Shrines designated as nation-protecting shrines are dedicated to the memory of war dead. They enshrine as kami the souls of all who gave their lives out of conviction. Yasukuni Jinja in Tokyo is a fine example of such a martyr memorial.
Are there any Hindu holy cities?
Hinduism's sacred cities far outnumber those of any other major religious tradition. All the earth is of divine origin and India stands at the center of that divinity. According to one model there are 7 sacred cities, each associated with a divine event. Benares or Kashi, City of Light, is the home of Shiva. In Ayodhya, Rama set the capital of his realm. Krishna was born in Mathura, and from Hardwar the Ganges begins its journey to the south. These, along with Kangchi, Ujjain, and Dvaraka, form the basic grid of a vast network of sacred geography in which countless other places are sacred for innumerable reasons. All important sacred places are called tirthas, places at which one can cross a river. 4 cities function as directional tirthas at the 4 cardinal points, Badrinath in the north, Rameshwara in the south, Puri in the east, and Dvaraka in the west. According to one mythic narrative, 108 places became sacred by association with the body of Shiva's wife, Sati. After she threw herself on the funeral pyre, a grieving Shiva carried her remains across India. And every place bits of her fell to earth became a seat of the goddess. Every denomination and sect has its favored sacred city. Perhaps the single most important city, one that most Hindus acknowledge as sacred, is Benares. Though it is particularly holy for Shaivites, Benares's spiritual magnetism works on all devout Hindus.
What rites do Hindus practice at home?
In their homes many Hindus engage in a smaller scale version of temple puja, morning, noon, and evening. Miniature shrines often occupy a special corner, where all the necessary materials and implements for worship are kept. Puja beings with entering into the proper frame of mind and with invocations. Placing flower petals on the image, along with water and other elements, ghee, honey, milk, reminds devotees of the intimacy of their relationship with God. They symbolize that intimacy with actions and materials that communicate deep affection and warmth, both in the home and in the temple. God is the guest whom the host and hostess strive to make perfectly welcome. Making the deity beautiful often means clothing the images in elaborate garments as well. People sometimes invite a priest to come to their homes to pray. But generally the head of the household leads the home puja. Many Hindu householders regularly perform the individual morning prayer before sunrise. Facing east with the sacred thread over the left shoulder, worshippers take a sip of water. Pronounce mantras over ashes, and place them on their foreheads, arms, ribs, and knees. To be purified of sin, they pray the Gayatri mantra, a lovely short hymn to the light of the sun. Several different forms of prayer might include facing the various cardinal directions while performing slightly different ritual actions. Other domestic rituals can include special celebrations associated with building and entering a new home for the first time. Other occasions marked with religious rituals at home include especially the various rites of passage associated with birth and early infancy.
How did Lao Zi become deified?
There seem to have been a number of stages in that process. First, the legendary figure began as a teacher and writer, whose image eventually blended with that of the Yellow Emperor when Lao Zi came to be identified as a confidant of royalty. Traditional accounts, such as the life story summarized above, transformed him into a cultural hero whose mother had conceived him virginally. By the mid-2nd century CE, Lao Zi had become the deity who delivered to Zhang Ling the revelation of a new religious faith, giving rise to the Celestial Masters School. But his image was still not complete. Next, perhaps also around the 2nd or 3rd century CE, Lao Zi seems to have been identified as a creator god who also enters the world to rescue humanity from tribulation. Lao Zi was now capable of incarnating himself, almost like a Buddhist bodhisattva. Not long thereafter he joined the triad of the three pure ones. And finally Lao Zi emerged as the chief divine person. We have here one of the more interesting examples of apotheosis, or deification, in the history of religion.
Have Shinto practitioners traditionally sent out missionaries to convert others?
Shinto has been so closely identified with Japanese culture as to be virtually inseparable from it. A desire to spread Shinto with missionary zeal would make about as much sense as wishing one could turn non-Japanese persons into Japanese. It is as unnecessary as it is impossible. Even the most devoted and active practitioners of Shinto do not generally feel themselves called to spread the tradition. At the heart of Shinto is a natural wisdom that cannot be taught or spread by decree. It is as natural as breathing. Of course, everyone is better off breathing, but it's not something one can teach. Since the tradition is passed on organically, so to speak, and inherited as a family and national treasure, practitioners do not think of it as something necessary for the betterment or salvation of humanity. At the same time, active members of local Shinto communities remain hospitable to a fault. Arrive at a shrine during a festival, and however much you may stand out from the crowd, chances are good that someone will invite you to participate in the celebration.
What does the term Hinduism mean?
As a standard term in religious studies, Hinduism refers to a whole family of religious traditions deeply rooted in the Indian subcontinent. Hinduism derives from an ancient linguistic root that means to flow. And rivers have indeed been and have remained a central feature in the religious life of nearly a billion Indians. A bit of river imagery here will help to explain how many diverse traditions have come together to form the greater Hinduism of our day. Imagine an extensive network of rivers stretching across the whole of the Indian subcontinent. One major river flows from the northwest down toward the Indian heartland. Another originates in the south. Each grows as dozens of tributaries flow into it along its course. In the center of the subcontinent, the two broad streams come together into one vast waterway. As it nears the sea, the great river opens again into a broad delta. The northern river, called the Aryan, carries a system of religious beliefs that came together from tributaries to the northwest of India as long as 5 or 6 millennia ago. Deities of the Aryan tradition seem to have much in common with those of the classical Greek and Roman pantheons, with their lords of wind, weather, and sky. The Dravidian river to the south represents ancient indigenous traditions surrounding the forces that rule earth and fertility, mountain and valley, powers of life and death. Beyond the confluence of the two great river systems, no one remembers that the one immense flood was once many.
What were the most important early Islamic sectarian movements?
Immediately upon Muhammad's death, Muslims had to face the question of succession to leadership of the community. One faction claimed that the Prophet had designated his cousin and son-in-law, Ali, as his successor. They were to become known as the party or faction, Shia, of Ali. And today their various sub-communities are called Shi'i Muslims or Shiites. But a majority held that Muhammad had made no such appointment, and that it was up to the elders to choose from among themselves. They considered their course of action to be both in keeping with the example of Muhammad, called his Sunnah, and in the spirit of the needs of the whole community. Jama'ah, Jama'ah, of Muslims. This majority group came to be known as the people of the Sunnah and the Assembly. Al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, or Sunni Muslims for short.
What is the connection between ritual and the Theravada notion of making merit?
Some actions and attitudes take on a special ritual dimension because they are associated with the two essential spiritual activities of making and transferring merit. Actions that make merit for the individual store up positive energy needed to overcome the inappropriate craving that can prevent one from achieving liberation. These actions prominently include a group of 10 proper beliefs: reverence and service of one's elders, giving generously to monks, observing the 5 or 8 precepts. Various forms of meditation including recitation of scriptural verses, respect for others, preaching, hearing a sermon, empathizing with merit, and transfer of merit. When lay Buddhists commit themselves temporarily to the 8 precepts, they add the monastic practices of avoiding food after the noon meal, certain forms of entertainment, and the use of cosmetics. Some lists of merit-making deeds also include building a monastery, becoming a monk, or having a son do so, donating funds for the repair of a temple, and observing every Uposatha, Sabbath. Transfer of merit is a doubly meritorious form of altruism, since in the very intention to share, one receives back. In fact, Buddhists characteristically see a reciprocity in all ritual deeds. Devotees give generously to monks, for example, and the monks give spiritual encouragement, good example, and teaching in return.
Is there a Jewish ritual of marriage?
Many readers will be familiar with the Jewish custom of having the groom standing with the bride under a canopy. The huppah shatter a wine glass with his foot at the conclusion of wedding ceremonies. The symbolic act is meant to help people keep in mind the seriousness of marriage, and perhaps even to recall the destruction of the temple. The whole ceremony is called Kiddushin, the sanctification. Taking place in almost any kind of public space, including a synagogue, it begins with a procession. The ritual is largely up to the couple and their families, along with the rabbi presiding, and is not dictated by traditional text or established rubrics. A reception typically follows, often with a blessing before and after the meal.
Are apostles the same as disciples?
An apostle is literally one who is sent out, from the Greek apostolos. Readers may associate the term mostly with Jesus' early community of 12 elect followers. but Muslim tradition also uses it to refer to an important subcategory of the group known as prophets. Apostles, Mursalin in Arabic, are those special prophets who are given a scripture and a mission to all peoples. The other prophets are sent to a specific people only and do not bring a distinct sacred book. Disciples are literally those who learn from a master. Christian tradition numbers Jesus formally commissioned disciples at 70. According to Buddhist tradition, the Buddha gathered 500 primary disciples around himself, with a handful of them eventually gaining special recognition for expertise in one or another aspect of Buddhist teaching.
Did Daoist tradition spread beyond China?
Daoism has exerted some influence at various times all over East and Southeast Asia. Wherever Chinese have traveled, Daoism has gone and left its mark. But it rarely has made its presence felt dramatically outside of China and territories under Chinese control. Daoist teachings, however, have had a significant impact on Chinese Buddhism over the centuries. Buddhism in turn has transported those usually well hidden contributions on its missionary road throughout Asia. In relatively recent times, Daoism, and teachings that claim to be Daoist, have begun to enjoy increasing popularity in Europe and the Americas, but on a much smaller scale than other traditions of Asian origin.
How do Shinto practitioners celebrate birth?
Not long after a couple have a baby, traditionally about 30 days, they take the child to the shrine for a natal blessing. This is consistent with the belief that all new ventures and beginnings will fare better if brought before the kami. In addition, the symbolism includes the belief that the infant thus becomes a child of the family's protector kami. Parents arrange with shrine staff for a standard ceremony that takes place inside the Hayden, or outer worship hall. At larger shrines, a senior priest, assistant priest, and Miko typically perform the ceremony, pronouncing solemn prayers in an archaic Japanese. The priests then perform blessings over the young family by waving the harigushi. The Miko may also participate by blessing the worshippers with a green sakeke branch. Ancient Shinto tradition retains a class of divine beings called kami of birth or beginnings, Musubi no kami. They include kami of fire, youth, plenty, and the creator divinities who brought all things to birth.
What are the names of the Islamic months?
The 12 months of the Muslim calendar are Muharram, Safar, Rabi'i, Rabi 2, Jamada-I, Jamada 2, Rajab, Shaban, Ramadan, Shawwal, Dhul Qa'dah, and Dhul Hijjah.
What is the difference between a sermon and a homily?
In general, sermons tend to be longer and organized around a doctrinal or moral theme. Homilies may be lengthy, but they are generally situated in the context of a larger liturgical service. Whereas sermons as often as not are the main focus of a worship gathering. Sermons frequently take as their subject a line or somewhat longer passage from Scripture. The homily form seeks to comment on and elucidate a pair or set of scriptural texts. Precisely as Scripture and not so much as a springboard for an ethical discourse. The preacher typically chooses the sermon's signature passage because of its theme, rather than because the text has come up in due course as part of a prearranged cycle of readings. Homilies are more often a way of helping the congregation appreciate how the selected readings fit together and comment on each other, and how they fit in the larger scheme of the liturgical cycle for the season at hand, such as Advent/Christmas, Lent/Easter, ordinary time.
How do Jews view Judaism's relationships to other traditions?
Even the earliest biblical texts that describe the formative years of Judaism as a faith tradition show a vivid, if largely disapproving, awareness of the religious practices and beliefs of other peoples. Jews were to be a people of faith who would distinguish themselves by their faithful response to divine initiative. Biblical Judaism defined itself in the context of various Canaanite pagan cults, which often exercised an unholy fascination on Jews of wavering faith. Most Jews are, of course, keenly aware of their tradition's complex relationship to Christianity, which claims to be a fulfillment of an ancient messianic expectation. From the Jewish perspective, Christianity was just another of many false movements of its kind. Many have also been puzzled and hurt by ongoing Christian condemnations of Jews as Christ killers, a hateful epithet only recently repudiated by the Pope. Throughout medieval times in Europe, Jews often suffered cruelly as a result of severely prejudicial Christian decrees as to how Jews should live and even what they should wear in public. Most of all, many Jews simply do not understand why so many Christians have harbored such a virulent animosity toward Jews. Judaism has also had an important connection to Islam over the centuries. Jews have generally fared better under Muslim regimes throughout the Middle East, North Africa, and Spain than under Christian authority. From a strictly religious perspective, however, Judaism is strikingly close to Islam in many respects, both in practice and belief. From an uncompromising monotheism to dietary concerns to an egalitarian style of worship and view of authority.
Have relics ever been important for Christians?
Since very early times, Christians have cultivated a sense of The sanctity of the remains and memorabilia of holy persons. Since Christians believed early on that Jesus had resurrected bodily from his tomb, they began to focus. By around the 3rd or 4th century, on other reminders of Jesus' earthly life. People sought, and sometimes believed they had found, the cross on which Jesus was crucified. The nails that fastened him to it, or the crown of thorns he had worn. According to ancient tradition, St. Helena, mother of the Emperor Constantine, discovered the true cross of Christ. During excavations for her son's new Basilica of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. The resulting devotional ritual of venerating the sacred relics there may have been among the first of its kind and the beginning of a much expanded practice. During late medieval times, the Holy Shroud, thought to be the winding cloth in which Christ had been buried, became a center of widespread devotion in Europe. A veil, said to be the one with which St. Veronica wiped Jesus' face during his march to Calvary, and to which an image of Jesus' face was transferred, was venerated at St. Peter's in Rome from the 13th century on. Far more numerous, of course, are the relics of martyrs and saints. Some dating back to early Roman persecutions of Christians. Sacred remnants can be anything from entire bodies, skeletal remains, to intact or fragmentary bones and skulls, to items once owned or touched by the holy person. Claims to possession of certain sacred relics have often conflicted. There are several heads of John the Baptist, for example. Famous relics conferred a great deal more than religious prestige on the churches, monasteries, and shrines that owned them, for the more renowned and powerful the relic, the greater the traffic of pilgrims to the holy place. Relics generally have been more significant for Catholic and Orthodox Christians.
Do Shinto practitioners run private schools for their children?
Private schools equivalent to parochial educational systems in some other traditions have not been institutionally significant in the history of Shinto. Perhaps the closest thing to structured education in Shinto beliefs and values have been occasional government attempts to insert components of Shinto-i.e. traditional or national Japanese ethics into school curricula. In 1937, for example, the Ministry of Education incorporated themes from an 1890 imperial document on education into a new ethics curriculum called Principles of the National Entity, Kokyutai no Hongi, meant to implement the concept of state Shinto. The document emphasizes the historicity of the classic mythical narratives concerning the emperor's divine descent. It praises unquestioning dedication to the corporate good of the Japanese people under the virtuous rule of the emperor. These pre-war governmental actions, however, are entirely different from the grassroots Impulses that gave rise to private religious schools in traditions such as Islam and Christianity. There is really no Shinto parallel. In fact, the Meiji and subsequent regimes attempt to teach ethics from on high. So to speak, explicitly forbade religious education on the local or shrine level. Since World War II, however, numerous shrines throughout Japan have developed programs for children and young people, including nursery schools and kindergartens. But these are exclusively social and cultural, rather than religiously educational, developments.
What signs or symbols distinguish Shinto ritual specialists?
Shinto priests wear distinctive garb, called shozaku. Modeled on courtly fashions from the Heian period, the days when Japan's capital was in Kyoto. Ritual robes are of several types. They wear a kimono and a kind of very full-cut pants underneath. Outer garments originally indicated courtly rank with various colors, robin's egg blue, red, purple, yellow, and light green, but now a priest's rank is indicated by either the pale blue, black, or red. Outer garments have very wide flowing sleeves and extend down to the feet. For ordinary ceremonies, priests wear a white silk vestment called a karanigo, hunting cloak from medieval times. With the simpler garments for ordinary duties, priests wear a plain roundish hat called eboshi. Reserving the taller and more elegant kanmurai for special ceremonies. High-ranking priests wear polished wooden shoes for rituals. And their subordinates wear thong sandals of wood. During all ceremonies, officiants carry a slender, tapered slab of wood called the shaku in the right hand. Similar to the one seen in images of Chinese ancestor figures. Since even a layperson sometimes leads rituals and wears these same garments, they do not function like a habit to distinguish priests from laity. When not performing their shrine duties, Shinto priests wear ordinary street clothes. Shrine maidens, Miko, wear a white kimono top and a vermilion or scarlet split skirt. Only when they are performing shrine duties. Musicians, whether priests or not, also wear similar versions of Heian court fashion during ceremonies.
What signs or symbols distinguish Daoist ritual specialists?
Daoist priests or masters make extensive use of symbolic vestments in ritual settings. Apparently in imitation of the garments emperors once wore for religious rituals. Daoist specialists today wear three types of vestments in various colors, depending on sectarian affiliation. For the most sacred occasions, a high priest wears a square red silk poncho-like vestment called the garment of descent that symbolizes earth. For regular major rituals, the celebrants might wear a red or yellow silk overgarment called the Dao gown with the character for Taiji or the 8 trigrams on front and back. Other common decorative motifs include images of the 8 immortals, often depicted on the hems of broad, flowing sleeves. Abstract cloud designs often stand for yin, while cranes and male versions of the mythical creature called the Qilin, sometimes associated with the unicorn, but very different from the European unicorn, represent yang. For penitential rites, the assistants might wear the sea blue vestment, whose darker color accords with a darker ritual purpose. Under these garments, specialists wear a square silk apron. Officiants also wear distinctive headgear, including a black skull cap under a metal 5-pointed crown. Recalling the 5 elements, bestowed in the ordination ceremony. Ritual shoes like those once worn in the imperial court bear cloud symbolism that suggests the ability to walk the very heavens as the priest delivers the prayers of the people to the deities.
What effect did the Japanese loss of World War II have on Shinto?
After the Emperor Meiji restored imperial power, when the last of the great shoguns asked to be relieved of the burden of authority, loyalty to the emperor became a central theme. Prior to 1945, the vast majority of Japanese regarded the emperor, Hirohito, as infallible. Dedication to the imperial person and rule was perhaps the most important element in national unity. Admission of defeat in 1945 naturally struck at the heart of this central cultural institution. Since most people associated the emperor's divine descent with ancient Shinto tradition, the disastrous defeat called into question the viability of Shinto as a way of understanding the world and the place of the Japanese people within it. On December 15, 1945, the Supreme Commander of Allied Powers, General Douglas MacArthur, issued the Shinto Directive, dramatically altering the shape of Japan's indigenous religious tradition. Acknowledging the tremendous symbolic connection between Shinto and Japanese nationalism, the decree disestablished all shrines and declared them private institutions. Priests were no longer officials of the government. The directive replaced 3 earlier national structures: the National Association of Shrine Priests, Research Institute for Japanese Classics, and Supporters of the Grand Shrine, of ISE, with the Association of Shinto Shrines. It attempted to bring as many shrines as possible into a voluntary organization, whose purpose was to redefine Shinto as non-nationalistic religious tradition. Most shrines agreed to join, and most remain under local administration, entirely responsible for their own fundraising and upkeep. Long-standing tradition, however, does not yield so easily to the decrees of conquering foreigners. A number of major shrines, such as Yasukuni in Tokyo and others dedicated to Japan's war dead, still have the power to stir nationalist sentiment. Even now, politicians who want to play that card occasionally make highly publicized visits to Yasukuni.
What is a dibuk?
Kabbalistic thought included a feature quite foreign to Jewish tradition generally. Namely, belief in reincarnation, Gilgal. The idea developed during the Middle Ages as a proof of God's perfect mercy. Even a seriously sinful person who died unrepentant might have another chance to make things right. Since the idea did not fit neatly with the concept of a permanent afterlife of punishment in Gehenna, the Kabbalists gradually modified the idea of transmigration of souls into that of a generalized cosmic flux. Some of the greatest people who died in sin, such as Adam and Eve or Cain and Abel, were said to have returned in a later age. In these cases as David and Bathsheba or Moses and Jethro, with a second chance to make good. Eventually the term dibuk, adhesion, at first a common term for devil, came to refer to the homeless souls of the unforgiven who roamed the cosmos in search of people to possess.
What is the practice known as sati?
The word sati originally referred to a woman of virtue, a reference to a newly widowed individual who joined her husband in death by throwing herself on his funeral pyre. The name comes from Shiva's wife Sati, who committed suicide after her father insulted her new husband. Ritual suicide by widows spread through medieval times and continued well into the early modern era. Even after the practice was outlawed in 1829, it continued in many villages. Incidents of sati still occasionally make headlines. But increasing social action on behalf of women's rights continues to improve the situation all over India.
Where do Christians live today? What are their estimated numbers?
Members of the several dozen major Christian churches and denominations live in virtually every country on the planet. As the largest single group of religious communities, people who identify themselves at least nominally as Christians number just under 2 billion. Christianity's numbers are expanding at a rate somewhat slower than that of the global Muslim community. Catholicism is the single largest Christian church, with around 1 billion members. Protestants combined number about a third of a billion, with Orthodox believers just under a quarter billion, with Russia's church the largest single body. The smallest Christian communities in major countries are those in Japan and China.
Who was Matteo Ricci and what was his role in China?
Matteo Ricci, 1552–1610, was an Italian Jesuit missionary who opened China to Roman Catholic evangelization. He was the best-known Jesuit and European in China prior to the 20th century. Born at Macerata in 1552, Ricci went to Rome in 1568 to study law. In 1571 he entered the Society of Jesus. After studying mathematics and geography at a Roman college, He set out for Goa in 1577 and was ordained there in 1580. In 1582 he was dispatched to Macau and started to learn Chinese. In 1601, Ricci made his way to Beijing and received a warm welcome from the emperor. This imperial favor provided Ricci with an opportunity to meet the leading officials and literati in Beijing, some of whom later became Christian converts. Ricci obtained a settlement with an allowance for subsistence in Beijing, after which his reputation among the Chinese increased. Besides the missionary and scientific work, from 1596 on he was also superior of the missions, which in 1605 numbered 17. When he died in 1610, he was granted a burial place in Beijing. Some of the outstanding Chinese literati with whom Ricci had contact later became his converts, including the famous scholar officials Hsu Kuang-chi, Li Chi Tsao, and Yang Ting-yun. Ricci's writings include about 20 titles, mostly in Chinese, ranging from religious and scientific works to treatises on friendship and local memory. The most famous of these are the Mappamondo and the True Idea of God.
Is there an Islamic creed?
One short, two-part statement sums up the essentials of Muslim belief. I confess that there is no deity but God, and that Muhammad is the messenger of God. In this testimony called the Shahada, confession or witnessing, Muslims affirm the two foundational elements from which all other beliefs and practices flow. First, they assert that only the one, transcendent, Supreme Being called Allah in Arabic can claim the full allegiance of humankind. Allah means literally the deity, or what ordinary English usage calls God with a capital G. Allah is therefore not a distinct name for God as such, but the primary designation for the Absolute, the deity above all other powers both spiritual and worldly. Affirming God's absolute oneness is called Tawhid, pronounced Tawheed. Second, Muslims attest that human beings know of the Supreme Being through the agency of prophets, the last of whom was Muhammad. This profession of faith is the first of the 5 pillars of Islam. Along with almsgiving, daily ritual prayer, fasting during Ramadan pronounced Ramadan, and pilgrimage to Mecca, all of which will be discussed later in detail. Muslim religious scholars between about 750 and 950 formulated a number of other, more detailed creedal statements, but none has been as widely known as the Nicene Creed among Christians or the 13 Articles among Jews. Those later Islamic creeds developed largely as correctives to theological positions that arose during Islam's early centuries, views that the creeds formally repudiated as unacceptable.
Do Shinto practitioners mark sacred spaces with any distinctive signs and symbols?
Easily the most important symbol of Shinto sacred spaces is the Torii Gate. marking the entry and pathways to every shrine. Torii typically consist of a pair of unadorned upright columns and a pair of crossbeams, or lintels, at the top. The upper crossbeam generally sits directly atop the column and protrudes on both sides, while the lower beam either ends at the columns or goes through and protrudes. Some torii have more elaborate uprights and crossbeams. Depending on local and regional architectural styles. Devotees give torii as votive offerings to some shrines, lining pathways with hundreds of them inches apart, so that the entry to the shrine feels almost like a covered walkway. According to legend, the torii recalls the perch from which birds sang to entice the sun goddess from her cave. Most Shinto shrines use the simplest and most natural materials available, imitating nature as much as possible. Natural wood grains and the lovely green forest patina that eventually accents thatch or wood shingled roofs gives them a rustic character and charm. Many shrine roofs still display remnants of primitive architectural elements as a reminder of antiquity. Although newer building methods no longer require them. Many shrines retain a row of logs called katsuoji set along the ridge beam of the roof. Older structures needed the katsuoji to hold the thatch roof down. Another bit of architectural nostalgia are the vertical extensions of the eave beams above the roof line. As you view a shrine from either front or rear, you notice that the roof line forms an X. Horizontally trimmed upper ends of these beams, known as chiji, mark the shrines of female kami, and vertically trimmed ends those of male kami. Several rather mysterious symbols adorn holy places, whether or not the site has a structure on it. Thick straw ropes called shiminawa mark sacred places such as trees and rocks. Outer portals of shrines, whether actual buildings or miniature models used on home altars, also suspend shiminawa across their facades. Attached to the rope are pieces of white paper cut in zigzag fashion symbolizing offerings to the kami. The same bits of paper are attached to a ritual wand called the goe. Legend has it that the rope originated as a way of restraining the sun goddess from escaping back into her cave.
Do Jews practice rituals of divination?
In biblical times, one of the roles of the temple's high priest was to serve as a medium for oracles. Part of the priestly paraphernalia was a mysterious pair of objects called the Urim and Thummim, which were a form of lot carried in a pocket called the breastplate and suspended from the shoulders. The Urim and Thummim, a pair of flat stones, are mentioned a number of times in the Hebrew Bible, suggesting that this form of divination was of some importance, even though others were explicitly forbidden. Thummim may derive from a word that meant perfect, hence of positive value. Scholars surmise that Urim probably carried a negative meaning. They may thus have been read as yes or no, guilty or innocent. For example, in determining the answer to a question, Even the word Torah apparently comes from a root that means to cast lots in order to obtain an oracle. The high priest would toss the Urim and Thummim, one meaning yes and the other no, in order to determine God's will in a given instance. King Saul was so chosen to rule Israel, as were priests in outlying areas selected to work in the temple. Divination has found no significant place in post-biblical Jewish tradition.